Hi, welcome to our new show called The Islamic Dilemma. I'm your host, Fadi, and I would like to give you an idea about why this show is important. In our show, we are going to tackle a lot of important issues related to Islam. However, as a former Muslim myself, I noticed that unless a person knows classical Arabic and knows how to research the Quran and other Islamic resources, it will become difficult to try to grasp the teaching of Islam, its doctrines, and also understanding the many things that we are struggling with, especially in the West, concerning Islam and the dilemma of Islam being a religion of peace versus the terror attacks that normally Muslims or Muslim convert are associated with. And throughout this show, we are going to do our best to discuss many of the important topics and unique issues that deal with the religion of Islam. With me today, a very special guest. His name is Bill. Bill, I'd like to welcome you to the show.
Delighted to be here. Delighted.
Welcome. I want to also share with you why this show is going to be a unique one. As I mentioned, unless a person knows the Arabic language, it will become fairly difficult for them to understand the many hidden meanings and the many teachings that are only found in a text of the Quran or the Islamic resources. Many times when I'm speaking to non-Arabic speaking people, I realize how much, or how little, I should say, they know about Islam. In fact, not only non-Arabic speaking people, in fact, Muslims who do not speak Arabic also that live in the West, like Europe or the US or Australia or other countries like this, or even in Southeast Asia, I discovered that they do lack a lot of understanding of Islam based on the fact that they do not know how to read the Arabic language. And Bill, would you like to comment on that? Yourself, for instance, and your journey through your research about Islam?
Well, of course, I am not an Arabic speaker, nor do I read Arabic. So I compensated for this when I first tackled the Quran. I read as many commentaries as I could on it, but I also read the Quran in 10 different translations. I figured that between 10 different scholars, surely I could come up with the meaning.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned that you read the Quran in 10 different translations. Did you find that there were some differences between these translations for a given verse, for instance?
Yes. There's a great deal is made about a better translation of the Quran or some such thing. And what I found was, comparing all 10 translations, is that in general, they were all the same except on one issue. And if that issue involved violence, then you could see how the translators would dial that up or down. And so that was really the main difference.
That's a good point, and I can even add to what Bill just mentioned. For instance, there is a verse in the Quran that talks about the God of Islam, describing him as, in the Arabic language, as the master deceiver. However, when you look at all of the English translations, amazingly, that very terminology has been changed over to a master planner, or master plotter, or schemer. I mean, what was your reaction when you first discovered the actual meaning in the Arabic language, for instance?
My eyes got big. I mean, I had never thought in my life of God being a deceiver and a schemer, and particularly one who would plot against me. Why?
That's a very interesting thought, and of course sometimes we are being told that you have to read that particular verse within its context, but when you read it within its context, it actually talks about a plot, and one of which, for instance, a plot from the Romans and the Jews against Jesus, for instance, and the crucifixion of Christ. So there is also within the context the concept of someone basically planning something, and in this case, of course, the God of Islam is being the one who is plotting this whole scheme.
Yes, and the other thing that disturbed me when I first read it was I discovered that Allah didn't like me at all.
How does that make you feel, for instance, when you found something like that about a God that is supposedly the God of a religion of peace?
It was very disturbing because I had been raised in the Christian faith and God was of love. And here was a God who could hate me, who was plotting against me, scheming against me. I actually had this mental image of, you've ever seen an ant farm?
Yes.
Okay, I got the image from the Qur'an that I was like in an ant farm and Allah owned me and He would be playing tricks with me, blocking off passages and stuff. It was a very unusual, to have someone scheming against me, it was a mind adjustment I had to make.
Well, thank you for that insight, Bill. Certainly this adds to the importance of having a show like this one. We are going to take the teaching of Islam and its doctrines, and we're going to try to simplify it in a manner that as a non-Arabic person will be able to comprehend. We're going to take Islamic terminologies, and we will do our best to provide the translation in English in a way also that will preserve the actual meaning in Arabic and be faithful to it, but at the same time provides a clarification for those particular terminologies, especially the teachings of Islam. That sometimes, even in Arabic, it might be a very dry teaching. So as you can tell, so far, the emphasis of our show is to bring to light certain teachings about a religion that announces and proclaims itself to be a religion of peace, yet really when you get to the heart of the matter, you are going to discover a lot of contradicting teachings within this religion and all of its sources that demand an explanation. And unfortunately, the first hurdle a person will be faced with is the Arabic language. And as I mentioned, not only non-Arabic speaking people are going to struggle with the meaning of these particular teachings, but also sometimes Arab-speaking people may also struggle with understanding and comprehending the meaning of those terminologies and the doctrines simply because many of them are written in classical language, Arabic language that has been written over 14 or 13 or 12 centuries ago. Bill, before we continue with our discussions, I would like for you to give our viewer something more about your background and also your journey in terms of your interest about Islam and how did that came about and how did it develop?
I was raised in a very religious family and I developed an intense interest early on about the effects of religion on history. And this is a lifelong interest. And I also became fascinated with all other kinds of religion. I was raised in a very small town, I only knew one. And so after I left college, I began to read about all different kinds of religion, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism. And after I'd studied all these different isms, sometime in my early 40s, I realized that there was yet one religion that I had not studied and one that was enormously influenced on history, and that was Islam. So I did what anybody would do. I got a Qur'an, one of those big, thick green books, and I started trying to read it.
And how far ago was this?
Oh, that was 30 years ago that I first started studying Islam.
And back then you thought Islam has a lot of influence also.
Well, I knew it was politically influential, but really my first introduction to Islam was with a Sufi teacher, Pir Vilayat Khan. I went to hear a lecture of his in Manhattan, and I was somewhat taken with the idea that here was something that was more Western than, say, Buddhism, and so I'd become quite interested in personal experience, and I started studying Sufism. Bought a bunch of books on it, even went to Sufi dances and learned how to do some of the chants and moves. I don't remember why, but that just sort of went on its way. But that was my first introduction, was through mystical Islam.
Now, if you were to compare that mystical side of Islam, which, by the way, as a former Muslim, I can tell you, not a whole lot of Muslims consider it to be even an orthodox form of Islam. If you were to compare it to the other isms that you mentioned, is there anything that was unique about it?
Well, Sufism, and which was what when I first met it, seemed a lot like Buddhism from Arabia. It was very mystical. It was full of beautiful images.
So what you're saying, it was borrowing things from other isms, at least.
So it seemed.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was my first interest. And then after that, I didn't study Islam anymore until I realized that I didn't really know the Qur'an. So I wanted to pick up a Qur'an and read it. And of course, I immediately had all the problems that everybody has when they pick up a Qur'an to read. The only thing was I had one thing which I noticed a lot of people don't have. I don't know how many people I've known who said, well, I tried to read it, but then I couldn't understand it, so I set it aside.
And you're talking about the Quran in English, actually.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
just in Arabic, but in English, and you still struggled understanding it.
I immediately rejected the idea that somehow or another you had to be Arabic to understand Islam, because it was contradictory. If this was a universal religion, then why couldn't a non-Arab understand it?
And that's an excellent point, because Islam really presents itself as a universal religion that actually, if I want to summarize it, it's the final religion, final revelation by the God of Islam, by the final prophet, with a final book to all mankind, yet the language used is a language that is only confined in Arabia.
Right.
And not a whole lot of people in the world would have understood it.
And I noticed something else. People didn't drag out, particularly Muslims, didn't drag out the Arabic business until you stumbled on something that was unpleasant. And that was when the excuse came up, well, you really need to know Arabic to understand,
Can you give us an example of that?
Well, jihad, for instance, or that was the main thing. And it would be like, well, no, you need to know Arabic to understand that. And I was like, I didn't really cotton or take to the idea that somehow or another there was knowledge that I couldn't understand. I mean, I hold a PhD in quantum physics. That's a pretty arcane, difficult subject.
But Muslims will tell you, even if you get a PhD in the Arabic language, you're still not qualified to analyze and critique the Quran, because it's Arabic, is just a divine Arabic, and it's unique. In fact, I want to add to what Bill is saying, for there is a verse in chapter 9 of the Quran, verse 28 and 29. It talks about fighting the infidels, and in this case, it talks specifically about Christians and Jews, and the word used in Arabic is translated to the word fight. Yet many Muslim friends that I have, or even apologetics, they will say that the word fight, actually, it's just a struggle, it's a spiritual jihad, but really the context has nothing to do with that. It has to do with physical fighting, including killing, basically.
Well, when you read something that says cut off a hand and a foot, I don't think that's a poetic expression. I get the image of amputation
in here. Right. Excellent point. And keep going. Tell us.
Well, I was determined to push through. I took it as a personal challenge. And so I was just determined. And also I thought to myself, well, if an illiterate Arab can understand this, I can do this. And so I pressed on through till I got to the very end.
Excellent point, excellent point. And then what happened after that, after you began to develop your understanding? Was there at some point a changeover? Once now you had the Quran and you began to read it?
It became clear to me as I was reading it, because I'd read religious texts from all over the world, that something was missing with the Quran, that it didn't make sense. And so I began to look for what is missing. What would make this make sense? And of course, I then found that to understand the Quran, you have to understand not Allah, it's Muhammad that is the key to understanding all of Islam.